Welcome to the Sleeping Historian. Tonight, dear listener, we journey back to a quieter time, to the summer of 1937, to a small town nestled among the gentle hills of Vermont, where the stars shone a little brighter, the nights felt a little longer, and one young boy carried a secret beneath the moon. So settle comfortably beneath your blankets, close your eyes, and let the world slowly drift away. The Boy Who Collected Moonlight in Jars, a cozy sleep story from 1937 America. In the summer of 1937, there lived a boy named Oliver Finch. Oliver was 10 years old, with curious eyes, sandy brown hair, and a habit of asking questions that no one else in Maple Creek ever thought to ask. He lived in a small white farmhouse with his mother, his grandfather Henry, and a sleepy orange cat named Marmalade. Maple Creek was the sort of place where time seemed to move slowly. The baker opened her shop before sunrise each morning. The church bell rang softly every evening, and at exactly 8 o'clock without fail, the old train passed through the valley, its whistle echoing gently across the hills. Oliver loved listening to the train. Some nights he imagined it carrying travelers to distant cities beyond the mountains. Other nights he imagined it carrying dreams from one sleeping town to another. But there was one thing Oliver loved more than anything else: the moon. Every evening after supper, he would sit beside Grandpa Henry on the old wooden porch and watch the moon rise above the maple trees. Grandpa Henry was a quiet man. He wore the same brown hat every day and carried an old pocket watch that had stopped ticking. Many years ago, one warm summer evening, as fireflies drifted through the fields like tiny lanterns, Oliver turned to his grandfather and asked, "Grandpa, why does the moon always seem to follow us?" Henry smiled softly. "It doesn't follow us, Oliver," he said. "It simply enjoys keeping us company." Oliver thought that was a wonderful answer. The idea that the moon might be keeping watch over everyone in Maple Creek made him smile. For a few moments, the two of them sat quietly together, listening to the crickets singing in the grass. Then Grandpa Henry leaned closer and whispered something Oliver would remember for the rest of his life. "The moon leaves a little piece of itself upon the earth every single night." Oliver's eyes widened. "It does," Henry nodded, "if you know where to look." And from that moment forward, Oliver knew he had a mission. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, he quietly climbed out of bed and made his way to the kitchen. There, beside the sink, sat an empty glass jar. He picked it up carefully and stepped outside into the cool summer air. The world felt different at night. The fields shimmered beneath the moonlight. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. And somewhere far away, the old train gave one final whistle before disappearing into the darkness. Oliver walked slowly toward the creek behind the farmhouse. The moon reflected upon the water like a ribbon of silver. Holding the jar tightly in both hands, he whispered softly, "If you're really there, I'd like to find you." For several long moments, nothing happened. Then a single firefly drifted quietly into the jar. Oliver laughed. "I suppose that's a good beginning." He carried the jar home and placed it beside his bed before climbing beneath his blankets once more. Outside, the wind moved softly through the maple trees. Inside, the house remained perfectly still. And sometime after midnight, Oliver awoke. A gentle silver light filled his room. Slowly, he sat up in bed. The jar beside him had begun to glow, not brightly, only enough to fill the room with the soft light of a summer evening. Oliver walked to the window and looked out across Maple Creek. The town slept peacefully beneath the stars. The church stood silent. The train station sat empty, and high above the valley the moon watched over them all. For the first time in his life, Oliver wondered if magic might truly exist. And somewhere, carried gently upon the night wind, he thought he heard his grandfather's voice once more. "The moon leaves a little piece of itself upon the earth every single night." Oliver smiled. Tomorrow, he decided, he would bring another jar. And perhaps, just perhaps, the moon would be waiting for him once again. Take a slow breath, dear listener, and allow the quiet of the evening to settle around you once more. By the following morning, Oliver could think of little else besides the glowing jar beside his bed. He had checked it 3 times before breakfast. He had checked it again after feeding Marmalade, and he checked it once more before leaving for school. Each time the silver glow remained. Soft, gentle, almost as though the moon itself had decided to spend the day resting inside a little glass jar upon his bedside table. Life in Maple Creek continued as it always had. Mrs. Turner's bakery filled the streets with the scent of fresh bread. Children chased one another through the town square. and the old train arrived precisely at 8 o'clock each evening, never a minute early and never a minute late. But Oliver had begun to notice something. The moonlight seemed different now, brighter, warmer, friendlier. That evening, he carried a second empty jar beneath his arm and made his way toward the creek. The moon was nearly full. Its reflection danced gently upon the water as though it were inviting him closer. "Good evening," Oliver whispered politely. He wasn't entirely certain whether one was supposed to greet the moon, but it seemed like the sort of thing Grandpa Henry would approve of. He placed the jar beside the water and sat quietly upon a nearby stone. For several minutes nothing happened. Then, just as he began to wonder if he had imagined the entire thing, a soft silver glow appeared inside the glass. Oliver's eyes widened. This time there was no firefly, only light, pure and gentle. He smiled all the way home. By the end of the week, Oliver had collected 4 jars. One from the creek, one from beneath the old oak tree, one from beside the train tracks, and one from the hill overlooking Maple Creek. Each glowed differently. The creek jar shimmered like moving water. The oak jar glowed with a warm golden hue. The train jar flickered gently, almost in rhythm with distant whistles. And the hilltop jar sparkled like a sky full of stars. Oliver began keeping notes in a small notebook beneath his bed. He titled it, Moonlight Observations, Summer of 1937. His first entry read, "The moon appears to enjoy quiet places and kind company." Grandpa Henry laughed when Oliver read it aloud. "I believe you've discovered something important," he said. "What is it?" Oliver asked. Henry smiled. "Most people stop looking for magic long before they stop needing it." Oliver thought that was a very strange thing to say. But Grandpa Henry often said strange things. That was one of the reasons Oliver liked him so much. Over the next 12 nights, Oliver continued his journeys beneath the stars. Some evenings were warm and peaceful. Others were cool, with gentle rain drifting through the valley. Yet no matter the weather, the moon always appeared, watching, waiting, keeping it silent company. On the 7th night, Oliver sat beside the train tracks and listened as the evening train rolled slowly through the valley. The conductor tipped his hat as he passed. Oliver tipped his imaginary hat in return. He wondered where the passengers were going. Were they traveling toward great cities? Were they returning home? Or perhaps, he thought with a smile, they too were searching for pieces of moonlight. On the 9th night, he climbed the small hill beyond town and lay upon the grass. Above him, thousands of stars stretched endlessly across the heavens. He had never realized how large the world truly was. For the first time, Oliver understood why people wished upon stars. The night seemed full of possibilities, and perhaps, he thought, that was the moon's greatest gift. Not magic, not glowing jars, but wonder. By the 12th night, 12 glass jars sat upon the shelf beside his bed. Together, they filled his room with a soft silver light unlike anything Maple Creek had ever seen. His mother stood quietly in the doorway one evening, staring at the collection. "I still don't understand how you do it," she admitted. "Neither do I," Oliver replied honestly. Grandpa Henry, however, simply smiled from his rocking chair. "The moon remembers those who remember it." Outside, the wind moved gently through the maple trees. The church bell rang in the distance, and somewhere beyond the hills, the old train carried its passengers into the night. Oliver sat beside his window, looking out across the sleeping town. For a moment, he imagined every house in Maple Creek glowing softly beneath the moonlight. He imagined every dream floating quietly upward toward the stars. And as his eyes slowly grew heavy, he found himself wondering something he had never considered before. If the moon left pieces of itself upon the earth, perhaps the earth left pieces of itself upon the moon as well. It seemed like a fair arrangement. The thought made him smile, and so with 12 glowing jars beside his bed and the distant sound of the train echoing through the valley, Oliver closed his eyes and drifted peacefully toward sleep. Little did he know, the moon still had many secrets left to share, and somewhere beyond the edge of Maple Creek, beneath the branches of an ancient maple tree, something had begun whispering his name. As the days passed, Oliver's collection of moonlight jars continued to grow. Every evening after supper, he would place a small mark in his notebook before setting out into the night. By now, the notebook contained observations about moonlight beside rivers, beneath oak trees and upon quiet hills overlooking Maple Creek. Yet there was one place he had not explored: the train station. The station sat at the edge of town beside a field of tall grass that danced in the evening wind. It was small, with a wooden bench, a ticket window, and an old clock that seemed to run a few minutes behind the rest of the world. Oliver often wondered if time moved differently there. Every night at exactly 8 o'clock, the train arrived. Its whistle echoed through the valley long before its lanterns appeared in the distance. To Oliver, it sounded less like a machine and more like a song. One evening, carrying his 13th glass jar, Oliver decided that moonlight beside the tracks might be different from moonlight anywhere else. After all, trains carried stories, and perhaps he thought stories and moonlight had always belonged together. The sky was painted in shades of deep blue as he arrived at the station. Mr. Walter, the station master, sat upon the bench with a newspaper folded neatly in his lap. "Evening, Oliver," he said. "Evening, Mr. Walter." "Collecting fireflies again?" Oliver smiled. "Something like that." Mr. Walter chuckled. He had long ago learned that Maple Creek was a town best enjoyed without asking too many questions. Oliver sat quietly at the edge of the platform and waited. Soon he heard it. The distant whistle, then another, and another. A moment later, two bright lanterns appeared between the hills like a pair of golden eyes. The old train was coming. Steam drifted into the evening air as it slowly rolled into the station. Its wheels sang softly upon the tracks. Its windows glowed with warm yellow light. Oliver watched as passengers stepped onto the platform. Some carried suitcases, others carried flowers. One old woman carried nothing at all except a smile. Oliver often wondered where they had come from. He imagined distant cities with streets lined by lamps and bookstores that stayed open long after midnight. He imagined oceans, mountains, and places where people had never heard of Maple Creek. As the conductor stepped down from the train, he tipped his hat toward Oliver. "Evening, young man." "Good evening, sir." The conductor looked at the jar in Oliver's hands. "And what might that be?" Oliver thought carefully before answering. "A place to keep something important." The conductor smiled. "Then I hope you find it." With that, he climbed back aboard the train. The whistle sounded once more, and slowly the train continued its journey into the night. Oliver remained beside the tracks long after the station had fallen silent. He placed his jar carefully upon the wooden platform and waited. The moon shone brightly overhead. The rails reflected its light like two endless ribbons stretching toward the horizon. And then something extraordinary happened. The jar began to glow. Not silver this time, gold. A soft golden light swirled gently inside the glass, moving in time with the fading sound of the train's whistle. Oliver had never seen moonlight behave this way before. He carried the jar home beneath the stars, holding it carefully against his chest. That evening, Grandpa Henry examined the jar quietly. "Interesting," he said. "What does it mean?" Oliver asked. Henry smiled. "Perhaps the moon collects stories the same way you collect moonlight." Oliver considered this for a moment. "Do you think the train carries stories too?" "Oh, certainly," Henry replied. "Every train does." "Where do they go?" Henry leaned back in his chair and looked toward the moon. "Stories never really go anywhere, Oliver. They simply wait for someone willing to listen." Outside, the wind moved gently through the valley. For a long while, neither of them spoke. At last, Oliver asked the question that had been quietly resting in his heart. "Grandpa, do you think I'll ever leave Maple Creek?" Henry smiled without taking his eyes from the sky. "The moon will follow you." "Perhaps." Oliver laughed softly. "You really believe that, don't you?" Henry finally looked at him and smiled. "My boy, I've lived a very long time." He pointed toward the glowing jars beside Oliver's bed. "And after everything I've seen, I've learned something important." "What's that?" "The world is far more magical than most people allow themselves to believe." That night, Oliver placed the golden jar beside the others. Its light was warmer than the rest, almost as if it carried the memory of distant places. As he drifted towards sleep, he imagined the old train traveling beneath the stars, across rivers, through forests, past sleeping towns and quiet farms, and somewhere beyond the hills of Vermont, beneath the same moon that watched over Maple Creek. He wondered if another child might also be holding an empty jar toward the sky, for the moon, after all, belonged to everyone, and perhaps it had been collecting pieces of us all along. The autumn of 1937 arrived quietly in Maple Creek. The hills turned shades of gold and amber. The air became cooler, and each morning, Oliver found a few more leaves resting upon the porch beside Grandpa Henry's rocking chair. By now, the moonlight jars had become a part of everyday life. There were 13 of them, 13 small pieces of wonder resting upon the shelf beside Oliver's bed. Some glowed silver, some shimmered like water, and one, the jar from the train station, continued to glow with a warm golden light that reminded him of distant places he had never seen. Yet despite all he had discovered, Oliver could not stop thinking about one thing: the whispering maple tree. He had passed it many times over the years. It stood alone at the edge of town, beyond the church and past the last of the farmhouses. No one knew exactly how old it was. Some claimed it had stood there for 100 years. Others believed it had always been there. Even Grandpa Henry never spoke much about it. The tree keeps its own stories, he would say, and for reasons he could never explain, Oliver believed him. One evening, shortly after sunset, Oliver placed an empty jar into his satchel and quietly made his way toward the edge of town. The sky above Maple Creek was unusually clear. Thousands of stars stretched endlessly overhead. The moon hung low upon the horizon, larger than Oliver had ever seen it before. As he approached the tree, the evening grew strangely quiet. There were no crickets, no owls. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the stillness. The tree stood before him in silence. Its branches stretched toward the heavens like the arms of an old friend, reaching for the stars. Oliver stepped closer. "Good evening," he whispered. For a moment nothing happened. Then the leaves began to move, not with the wind, but with something else. A soft rustling filled the air, and carried upon that rustling came a voice. "Oliver." He froze. The voice was quiet, gentle, and impossibly old. Slowly he looked around. The fields behind him were empty. The town lights glowed faintly in the distance. There was no one there, only the tree. "Who's there?" Oliver whispered. The leaves rustled once more, but this time there was no answer. Oliver's heart beat a little faster as he sat beside the tree and placed the empty jar upon its roots. "If you're real," he said softly, "I hope you're kind." For several minutes the world remained perfectly still. Then, one by one, tiny lights began appearing among the branches overhead. At first, Oliver thought they were fireflies, but these lights were different. They drifted slowly through the air like falling stars. Some were silver, others were pale blue. And as they descended, they settled gently into the glass jar beside him. Oliver watched in complete silence. He had never seen anything so beautiful. When the final light disappeared into the jar, the tree fell silent once more. The moment had passed. Slowly, Oliver picked up the jar. It was warm, warmer than any of the others. And as he held it close, he thought he heard something else. Laughter, soft and distant, like the memory of a summer evening long ago. He returned home beneath the stars without speaking a single word. Grandpa Henry was waiting upon the porch. "I was beginning to wonder where you'd gone," he said with a smile. Oliver sat beside him and carefully placed the jar between them. Grandpa Henry's expression changed immediately. "You went to the tree." Oliver looked up. "How did you know?" Henry remained quiet for a long moment. Finally he said, "Because that's where I found my first jar." Oliver stared at him in surprise. "You collected Moonlight too?" Henry smiled. "When I was about your age." For the next several minutes neither of them spoke. They simply sat together, watching the moon climb higher into the sky. "Grandpa." "Yes, Oliver?" "Who was whispering my name?" Henry's smile softened. "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, my boy." "Then why do they exist?" Henry looked toward the hills beyond Maple Creek, to remind us that the world is still full of wonder. That night, Oliver placed the new jar beside the others. Immediately the room changed. The silver light upon the walls became brighter. The shadows seemed softer, and for just a moment, he thought he saw the outline of a great maple tree reflected upon his ceiling. As sleep slowly found him, Oliver listened to the familiar sounds of Maple Creek. The distant whistle of the evening train, the gentle creaking of Grandpa Henry's rocking chair upon the porch, and somewhere carried softly upon the autumn wind, the whisper of his name, "Oliver." He smiled without opening his eyes, for somehow he knew he had become part of a story much older than himself. And somewhere beyond the stars, beneath the endless moonlit sky, something was still waiting for him. Something wonderful, something that had waited a very long time to be found. And as the moon continued its quiet journey across the Vermont sky, Oliver sat peacefully beside his window, watching the stars one by one appear above Maple Creek. The 15 jars beside him glowed softly in the darkness, just as they had all those years ago. He smiled, closed his eyes, and remembered Grandpa Henry's words. "The world is still full of magic. You simply have to know where to look." And so, beneath the gentle light of the moon, Oliver drifted peacefully into sleep. Good night, dear listener. Sleep peacefully beneath the stars. This has been The Sleeping Historian, where every story is a journey and every journey